The wheels of Dr. Elias Whitmore's carriage cut deep grooves through the frozen mud as he approached the Thornfield farmstead. January wind howled across the Missouri plains, biting through his wool coat and settling into his bones like a promise of death. The telegram in his breast pocket crinkled with each jolt of the carriage, 3 desperate lines that had pulled him from his warm study in St. Charles: boy dead 3 days. Still moving. Come at once. The farmhouse stood isolated against the gray morning sky, its windows dark except for one flickering candle in what appeared to be the parlor. Smoke rose thin and straight from the chimney, the only sign of life in a landscape that seemed to hold its breath. Dr. Whitmore climbed down from his carriage, his medical bag heavy in his hand, and approached the front door with the measured steps of a man who had seen death in all its forms but never quite like this. Martha Thornfield answered his knock before he could raise his hand a second time. Her face was gaunt, eyes rimmed red with sleeplessness, and her hands trembled as she clutched a threadbare shawl around her shoulders. She looked at him with the desperate hope of a drowning woman grasping for driftwood. "Dr. Whitmore, thank God you've come," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. "He's in the parlor. He's been waiting for you." Waiting. The word sent an uncomfortable chill down the doctor's spine that had nothing to do with the January cold. The dead didn't wait. They simply were not. She led him through a narrow hallway lined with faded daguerreotypes of stern-faced ancestors, their eyes seeming to follow his movement in the flickering candlelight. The parlor door stood ajar, and through the gap, Dr. Whitmore could see the edge of what appeared to be a makeshift sickbed. But as Martha pushed the door wider, what he saw defied everything he had learned in 20 years of medical practice. The boy lay perfectly still on a narrow cot positioned near the fireplace. 8-year-old Samuel Thornfield appeared to be sleeping, his small form arranged with the careful precision of the recently deceased. His hands were folded across his chest, his hair combed neat, his best Sunday clothes pressed and clean. But his eyes were open, staring directly at the doorway where Dr. Whitmore stood, and they tracked his movement as he stepped into the room. "Samuel fell through the ice 3 days ago," Martha said, her voice hollow with exhaustion. "Isaac pulled him out, but he was already gone. No breath, no heartbeat. Cold as the pond itself. We laid him out proper, said our prayers, prepared him for burial." She gestured toward the boy with a shaking hand. Then he sat up and asked for his supper. Dr. Whitmore set his medical bag on a nearby chair and approached the bed with the cautious steps of a man entering a church for the first time. Samuel's eyes followed him, blinking occasionally, but the boy's chest remained perfectly still. No rise and fall of breath, no flutter of life beneath the ribs. "Hello, Samuel," the doctor said softly, his voice steady despite the wrongness that seemed to emanate from the small form before him. "I'm Dr. Whitmore. Your mother asked me to come see you." Samuel's mouth opened, and his lips moved in the careful formation of words, but no sound emerged. The boy's throat worked silently, as if he were speaking underwater, and his eyes grew wide with what appeared to be frustration or perhaps fear. Isaac Thornfield stood in the corner of the room like a scarecrow, tall and gaunt, his weathered hands hanging useless at his sides. He watched his son with the hollow gaze of a man who had seen his faith crumble and didn't know how to rebuild it. When he spoke, his voice was rough with unshed tears. He tries to talk, document moves his mouth like he's got something powerful important to say, but nothing comes out. Sometimes though, late at night, we hear whispers coming from in here. Words that sound like Samuel, but... He trailed off, shaking his head. Words that don't make sense from a boy his age. Dr. Whitmore knelt beside the bed and reached for Samuel's wrist, searching for a pulse that logic demanded must be there. The boy's skin was cold, not the warmth-drained cold of recent death, but the deep, penetrating cold of something that had never known warmth at all. His fingers found no flutter of life beneath the pale skin, no rhythm of a heart struggling to beat. Yet Samuel's eyes continued to watch him, alert and aware, somehow hungry. "May I examine him?" Dr. Whitmore asked, and Martha nodded quickly, desperate for any explanation that might restore order to her shattered world. The doctor opened his medical bag and withdrew his stethoscope, placing the cold metal against Samuel's chest. Silence. Not even the faint whisper of air moving through lungs. He moved the instrument to different positions, listening for any sign of life, but found only the profound quiet of the grave. Yet when he looked into Samuel's eyes, there was intelligence there, a consciousness that watched and waited and perhaps judged. "Can you hear me, Samuel?" Dr. Whitmore asked. The boy's eyes blinked once, deliberately, and his head moved in what might have been the smallest of nods. The doctor continued his examination with growing unease. Samuel's pupils responded to light, contracting and dilating as they should, but his body temperature remained stubbornly cold. When Dr. Whitmore pricked the boy's finger with a small lancet, Samuel flinched, his face contorting in what was unmistakably pain, but no blood flowed from the wound. Instead, there was only a tiny hole that sealed itself within moments, leaving unmarked skin behind. Martha watched from the doorway, her hands pressed to her mouth as if to hold back screams that might escape if given the chance. "He gets hungry, doctor," she whispered. "Asks for food with those moving lips of his, though no sound comes. And when I bring him soup, he swallows it down like any living child. But his body stays cold, and his heart stays still." Samuel's mouth began to move again, more urgently this time, his eyes fixed on Dr. Whitmore with an intensity that made the older man's skin crawl. The boy's lips formed careful shapes, and though no sound emerged, the doctor found himself leaning closer, as if proximity might somehow make the silent words audible. Then, in a voice like winter wind through bare branches, Samuel spoke. The words were barely a whisper, but they filled the room with a chill that had nothing to do with January weather. "The water remembers everything." Martha gasped and stepped back, bumping into her husband, who caught her with trembling hands. Dr. Whitmore felt his blood turn to ice in his veins, not because of what the boy had said, but because of how he had said it. The voice that emerged from Samuel's throat was not the voice of an 8-year-old child. It was older, deeper, tinged with knowledge that no living person should possess. Samuel's eyes rolled back in his head, showing only white, and his mouth fell open in a silent scream that seemed to go on forever. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the episode ended. The boy's eyes focused again, looking around the room with the confused innocence of a child waking from a strange dream. "Mama," he whispered, and this time his voice was his own, small and frightened. "Why is everyone looking at me like that? Have you ever felt someone watching you when you knew they couldn't be? Share your most unsettling experience below." Dr. Whitmore spent the next hour conducting every medical examination he had ever learned, methodically documenting the impossible in his leather-bound journal with the careful precision of a man desperate to find logic in madness. He tested Samuel's reflexes, present. He examined the boy's pupils, responsive. He checked for signs of rigor mortis, absent. Every measurement, every observation, every clinical detail pointed to the same inescapable conclusion: Samuel Thornfield was both completely dead and undeniably alive. The boy submitted to the examinations with the patient resignation of someone much older than his 8 years. He flinched when Dr. Whitmore tested his pain responses, blinked when bright light was shined in his eyes, and even smiled when the doctor made gentle conversation. But his skin remained the color and temperature of marble, and no amount of listening could detect even the faintest whisper of a heartbeat. "Tell me exactly what happened at the pond," Dr. Whitmore said, settling into a chair beside Samuel's bed while Martha brought him coffee that steamed in the cold air of the parlor. Isaac stood by the window, staring out at the frozen landscape as if it might offer answers that the living world could not. Martha's hands shook as she poured the coffee, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of a mother's guilt that would never fully heal. "Samuel was playing by the water. The pond froze over in December, thick enough to walk on, or so we thought. Isaac was in the barn, and I was hanging laundry. We heard the crack, then the splash, then. She closed her eyes, pressing her lips together as if to hold back the memory. Isaac turned from the window, his weathered face carved deep with lines of grief and something else, something that looked almost like shame. I ran faster than I ever have in my life, but by the time I reached the water, Samuel had already gone under. Took me near 5 minutes to break through the ice and pull him out. He was blue, document blue as a winter sky, and just as cold. No breath in him, no life at all. Dr. Whitmore made careful notes as Isaac spoke, but his pen hesitated when the farmer continued. I carried him back to the house, laid him on the kitchen table, and Martha tried everything she knew to bring him back. Breathed air into his lungs, pressed on his chest, even slapped his face to wake him. Nothing. We wrapped him in blankets, held him close, prayed over him for hours. But he was gone, doctor. As gone gets. Martha took up the story, her voice barely above a whisper. We sat with him through the night, taking turns, neither of us able to leave him alone. Come morning, we knew we had to face the truth. We washed him, dressed him in his Sunday best, and laid him out proper in here. I sent Isaac to town to arrange for the burial and the preacher. But when I came back, Isaac said, his voice hollow with remembered shock, Samuel was sitting up in bed, looking around like he'd just woken from a nap. He saw me standing in the doorway and smiled, bright as sunshine. Papa, he said, I'm powerful hungry. Is supper ready? Dr. Whitmore looked at Samuel, who was watching the adults talk with the quiet attention of a child trying to understand grown-up conversation. Do you remember falling through the ice, Samuel? He asked gently. The boy's face scrunched up in concentration, and he nodded slowly. It was cold, he said in his own voice, sweet and young. Really, really cold. And dark. Like being wrapped up in a big black blanket. He paused, his eyes growing distant. There were people down there, doctor. In the water. They were all talking at once, but I couldn't understand what they were saying. A chill ran down Dr. Whitmore's spine that had nothing to do with the winter air seeping through the farmhouse walls. What did these people look like, Samuel? Sad, the boy replied simply. They looked real sad. And they kept reaching for me, like they wanted me to stay with them. Samuel's voice dropped to a whisper. But something else was down there too. Something that wasn't people at all. Martha made a small, wounded sound and pressed her hand to her mouth. Isaac moved away from the window, his face pale with growing dread. What kind of something? Dr. Whitmore asked, though every instinct told him he didn't want to know the answer. Samuel's eyes went wide and distant, as if he were seeing something far beyond the walls of the parlor. When he spoke again, his voice carried that same eerie quality it had possessed earlier, older, deeper, touched by knowledge that belonged to the grave. It was hungry, he said. So very, very hungry. And it knew my name. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees in an instant. The fire in the hearth flickered and dimmed, casting dancing shadows across the walls that moved with a life of their own. Dr. Whitmore felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up as Samuel continued to speak in that voice that wasn't quite his own. It said I was expected. That my family owed a debt, and the time had come to pay. Samuel's head tilted to one side, like a bird listening to distant music. It said the water remembers everything, and it's been waiting so long for one of us to come home. Isaac stumbled backward, bumping into the wall, his face white as fresh snow. That's not possible, he whispered. Samuel couldn't know about, he's just a boy. Know about what? Dr. Whitmore demanded, but Isaac shook his head, his mouth clamped shut like a man who had already said too much. Samuel's eyes snapped back to focus, and his voice returned to normal. "I'm thirsty, Mama. Can I have some water?" The request hung in the air like a blasphemy, and Martha began to cry, quiet, broken sobs that spoke of a mother's heart breaking in real time. Dr. Whitmore closed his journal and stood, pacing to the window where he could see the frozen pond in the distance, a dark scar against the white landscape. "There's something you're not telling me," he said without turning around. "Something about your family, about that pond." Isaac's reflection appeared in the glass beside the doctor's, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of generations. "Some stories are better left buried, document. Some truths are too heavy for the living to carry." But even as Isaac spoke the words, Dr. Whitmore knew that whatever secrets the Thornfield family harbored, they were already crawling out of their graves. Samuel was proof of that, a boy caught between life and death, speaking words that belonged to neither world. As if summoned by his thoughts, Samuel's voice drifted across the room, soft and musical and utterly wrong. "The water remembers, Doctor. And what the water remembers, it never lets go." Dr. Whitmore turned back to the bed where Samuel lay, but the boy's eyes were closed now, his face peaceful in what might have been sleep. Yet somehow, the doctor knew that whatever was resting in that small, cold body, it wasn't sleep at all. It was something far older, far hungrier, and far more patient than anything that belonged in the world of the living. Night fell over the Thornfield farm like a shroud, bringing with it a cold that seemed to seep through the very walls of the house. Dr. Whitmore had remained at Martha's insistence, setting up a makeshift examination area in the parlor where he could observe Samuel through the long hours of darkness. The boy lay perfectly still on his cot, but his eyes remained open, reflecting the firelight like coins at the bottom of a well. The first voice came just after midnight. Dr. Whitmore was dozing in his chair when a sound unlike anything he had ever heard pulled him back to consciousness. It was Samuel's voice, but changed, higher, more fragile, carrying the tremulous quality of advanced age. The boy's lips moved, but his eyes remained fixed on the ceiling, unseeing. "Thomas? Thomas, where did you put my wedding ring? I can't find it anywhere, and Mother will be so angry if it's lost." The voice was unmistakably female, elderly, touched with the confusion of someone whose mind had begun to slip its moorings. Dr. Whitmore sat forward in his chair, his heart hammering against his ribs. Samuel's mouth continued to move, forming words in that strange, frail voice. "It's getting dark down here, Thomas. So dark and cold. The water keeps rising, and I can't find my way home. Won't you help me find my way home?" The voice faded into silence, and Samuel's eyes blinked once, slowly, before fixing on Dr. Whitmore with their usual intelligence. The boy looked confused, as if waking from a dream he couldn't quite remember. "Did I say something, Doctor?" Samuel asked in his own voice. "I had the strangest feeling, like someone else was trying to use my mouth." Before Dr. Whitmore could respond, footsteps creaked on the stairs, and Martha appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a heavy quilt. Her face was drawn with exhaustion, but her eyes were alert with the terrible awareness of a mother who had learned to fear the sound of her child's voice. "It's happening again, isn't it?" she whispered. "The voices." Dr. Whitmore nodded, unable to trust his voice. Martha moved to Samuel's bedside and smoothed his hair with a gentle hand, her touch careful and loving despite the wrongness that surrounded her son. "How long has this been going on?" the doctor asked. "Since the second night," Martha replied. "At first, we thought it was just Samuel talking in his sleep. Children do that sometimes. But then..." She trailed off, shaking her head. Samuel's eyes rolled back again, and when he spoke, it was in the voice of a different person entirely, younger this time, but still not his own. It was the voice of a child, but one filled with terror and desperation. "Papa, I'm scared. The rocks are falling, and I can't get out. Please, Papa, don't leave me down here in the dark." The boy's hands clawed at the blankets, as if trying to dig through solid stone, and his face contorted with panic that belonged to someone else's memories, someone else's death. Dr. Whitmore leaped to his feet and grasped Samuel's shoulders, trying to calm the child's distress. "Samuel, wake up. You're safe, you're in your own bed." But Samuel's eyes remained white and rolled back, and the terrified voice continued to pour from his lips. "The water's coming in. I can hear it rushing through the rocks. Papa, please, I don't want to drown." The voice dissolved into sobs that racked Samuel's small body, and Dr. Whitmore felt tears of his own begin to fall. Whatever was happening to this boy, it was connected to death, violent, terrifying death that seemed to echo through his voice like sound bouncing off the walls of a tomb. Martha knelt beside the bed and took her son's hand, whispering soft words of comfort that seemed to cut through the spiritual storm raging inside him. Gradually, Samuel's eyes focused, and his breathing, though it served no biological purpose, became calm and regular. "I see them sometimes," Samuel said quietly, his voice his own again. "The people in the water. They're all down there together, but they're lonely. They want someone to remember them, to know their names." He looked at Dr. Whitmore with eyes far too old for his young face. "They use my voice because they don't have their own anymore." Dr. Whitmore sank back into his chair, his mind reeling with implications he didn't want to consider. "Samuel, these people you see, do they tell you their names?" The boy nodded. "The old lady is called Eugenia Hartwell. She lost her wedding ring when her carriage went through the ice 43 winters ago. The little boy is Tommy Morrison. The rocks fell on him when he was working in the old quarry, before it filled up with water." Isaac appeared in the doorway as if summoned by the mention of the quarry, his face grim in the firelight. Dr. Whitmore turned to him with questions burning in his throat. "That pond was a quarry? When?" Isaac moved into the room like a man walking to his own execution. "Back in my grandfather's time. They dug limestone out of that hole for near 20 years. But the walls weren't stable, kept caving in. Lost 6 men before they finally gave up and let it flood." "And the woman?" "Eugenia Hartwell. Before my time, but the old-timers tell stories. Preacher's widow, trying to get to town for her daughter's wedding. Ice gave way under her carriage. They found the carriage, but never found her." Isaac's voice dropped to a whisper. "They say her ghost still walks the pond's edge some nights, looking for that ring." Dr. Whitmore felt the world shifting beneath his feet, reality bending in ways that his medical training had never prepared him for. How could Samuel know these things? He's 8 years old. Because they told him, Samuel answered for himself, his voice matter-of-fact in the way that only children could manage. "They're all still down there, Doctor. In the deep part, where the old quarry walls go down and down. They can't leave, so they talk to each other. And now they can talk to me." The fire crackled in the hearth, and outside, wind howled around the corners of the farmhouse like voices calling from a great distance. Dr. Whitmore looked at the boy, this impossible child who spoke with the voices of the dead, and felt the foundations of his understanding crumble like quarry walls in a flood. Samuel's mouth began to move again, and this time the voice that emerged was deeper, rougher, touched with the accent of someone who had worked with his hands and died before his time. "Tell my Mary the first never meant to leave her alone with the baby. The foreman said the walls were safe, but I knew better. I knew better, and I went down anyway because we needed the money." The voice broke with emotion that had been trapped underwater for decades. "Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I'm so sorry." As the voice faded, Samuel looked at Dr. Whitmore with eyes that held depths no child should possess. "They all have messages, Doctor. All of them want someone to know they existed, that they mattered. But there's something else down there with them. Something that's been waiting, and feeding, and growing stronger. The boy's voice dropped to a whisper that seemed to come from the very depths of the pond itself. And it's not finished with my family yet. Dawn came gray and cheerless, bringing with it a discovery that changed everything. Dr. Whitmore found Isaac in the barn, standing before a loose board in the back wall with the defeated posture of a man whose secrets had finally caught up with him. Behind the board lay a space that held journals wrapped in oiled cloth, their pages yellow with age and covered in handwriting that seemed to crawl across the paper like living things. "My grandfather's papers," Isaac said without turning around. "I found them when I was a boy, about Samuel's age. Read enough to know they contain things no decent man should put to paper. Tried to burn them once, but they wouldn't take flame." He laughed bitterly. "Should have known then that some sins run too deep for fire to cleanse." Dr. Whitmore lifted the journals with trembling hands, feeling their weight, not just physical, but something heavier, darker, like holding the concentrated essence of guilt. The top journal fell open to a page dated 1794, written in the careful script of someone who believed his words would outlive him. "Made the bargain today," the entry began. "God forgive me, I made the bargain. But what choice did a man have? Crops failing, children starving, winter coming on hard and no way to feed them. It spoke to me from the deep water, promised prosperity for my line, promised my descendants would never want for anything. All it asked in return was what it called the covenant of endings. Said every Thornfield man would come to it eventually, when their time was done. Seemed a fair trade then. Seems less fair now, with its voice still echoing in my skull." Dr. Whitmore looked up at Isaac, who had turned from the wall and was watching him with eyes full of ancestral shame. "Your grandfather made a deal with something in the pond?" "Not just the pond," Isaac replied. "The thing that lives beneath it. The thing that was there before the quarry, before the ice, before anything human ever set foot on this land." He gestured toward the journals. "Keep reading, document. It gets worse." The pages revealed a chronicle of prosperity built on darkness. Jeremiah Thornfield's crops had flourished even in drought years. His livestock multiplied beyond all reason. His children grew strong and healthy while neighboring families struggled with disease and want. But the prosperity came with a price that grew clearer with each generation. Every Thornfield man died before his time. Jeremiah himself had been found in the pond at age 42, apparently drowned while checking his nets, though he had been a strong swimmer since childhood. His son died in a farming accident that witnesses swore could never have happened, crushed by a cart that had been properly secured moments before. The pattern continued through the decades. Violent deaths, mysterious accidents, disappearances that ended with bodies washing up in the pond. The women and children lived, Isaac said, his voice hollow with understanding. Long, prosperous lives. But the men all went to feed the thing that made us rich. Dr. Whitmore found a passage that made his blood run cold. "It grows stronger with each feeding," Jeremiah had written. "More clever, more hungry. Whispers to me in dreams about the day it will have enough power to leave the water, to walk among the living. Says it just needs the right vessel, the right moment, the right sacrifice. God help me, I think I know what it wants." "Samuel," Dr. Whitmore whispered. Isaac nodded. The boy wasn't just claimed by drowning. He was called. That thing has been waiting 70 years for another generation to come of age, and Samuel was the first male child born to our line in all that time. He looked toward the house, where candlelight flickered in the parlor window. "It's using him, Doctor. Using him as a doorway between the world of the dead and the world of the living." Dr. Whitmore closed the journal, his mind racing with horrible possibilities. The voices Samuel hears, they're not just the spirits of the drowned. They're prisoners. Trapped by the same thing that holds Samuel now, Isaac confirmed. And getting stronger every day that boy stays between life and death. They returned to the house to find Martha sitting beside Samuel's bed, her face streaked with tears. The boy appeared to be sleeping, but his mouth moved constantly in silent conversation with presences only he could see. Occasionally, he would flinch as if struck, or reach out toward empty air as if trying to grasp something just beyond his reach. "It's getting worse," Martha said without looking up. "The voices are coming faster now, one right after the other. And sometimes..." She swallowed hard. "Sometimes I hear them too. Whispers coming from the walls, from the floor, from inside the very air we breathe." As if summoned by her words, Samuel's eyes opened, but they were no longer the innocent blue of a child's gaze. They were black, reflecting no light, deep as the bottom of the pond. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decades and the hunger of something that had never known satisfaction. Isaac Thornfield, the voice that emerged from Samuel's throat was ancient, patient, touched with an amusement that chilled the blood. "The debt comes due at last. 3 generations I have fed on your line, grown strong on your men's deaths, and now the covenant reaches its fulfillment." Isaac stepped forward, his fists clenched, his face white with fury and fear. "Take me then. I'm the man of this family. Leave the boy alone." The thing wearing Samuel's face laughed, a sound like water filling a grave. "Oh, Isaac. Sweet, simple Isaac. You still don't understand. I don't want your death, I want your life. I want to walk in flesh again, to taste air and sunlight and all the pleasures the living world has to offer. And this perfect little vessel, balanced so delicately between death and life, will give me that gift." Samuel's small hands curled into claws, scratching at the blankets with strength that no 8-year-old should possess. "I have been patient for so long. Fed on the fear and pain of your ancestors, grown fat on their desperation. But now I am ready to leave my watery prison and take my place among the living. And when I do, Isaac Thornfield, I will wear your son's face while I destroy everything you have ever loved." Martha let out a broken sob and reached for Samuel, but the boy's head snapped toward her with inhuman speed, his black eyes fixing on her face with predatory intensity. "Ah, the mother," the voice purred. "So much love, so much pain. When I am done with your husband, sweet Martha, I will let you live long enough to watch me play with your memories of what this boy used to be." The presence in Samuel seemed to grow stronger, more solid, as if feeding on the family's terror. The temperature in the room dropped until their breath came out in white puffs, and frost began to form on the windows despite the fire burning in the hearth. Dr. Whitmore stepped forward, his medical bag clutched in his hands like a weapon. "What do you want?" he demanded. "What will it take for you to release the boy?" Samuel's head turned toward him, and the black eyes studied him with ancient intelligence. "Want, good doctor? I want what was promised to me 70 years ago. I want to be born again into flesh, to leave behind the cold and the dark and the endless hunger of the deep places. Your little Samuel is my chrysalis, and when my transformation is complete, what emerges will have his face, his voice, his memories, but it will be me looking out through his eyes." The entity's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow filled the entire room. "The pact is nearly fulfilled. When the moon is dark tomorrow night, the barrier between life and death will be thinnest, and I will step through. Nothing you do can stop it now. The boy belongs to the water, and the water belongs to me." Samuel's eyes suddenly cleared, the black depths replaced by frightened blue, and the boy looked around the room with confusion and growing terror. "Mama? Papa? What's happening to me? I can feel something inside, something that's not me, and it's getting stronger." Dr. Whitmore knelt beside the bed and took Samuel's cold hand in his own. "We're going to help you, son. I promise." But even as he spoke the words, he could see the doubt in Samuel's eyes, and worse, he could feel the presence lurking just beneath the surface of the boy's consciousness, patient and hungry and utterly confident in its approaching victory. If you discovered your family had made a deal with darkness to secure your future, would you honor the pact or break it? The entity's presence grew stronger as the second night deepened, transforming Samuel's small body into a battlefield between the living and the dead. Dr. Whitmore watched in horror as the boy's skin began to show signs of decay, not the natural decomposition of death, but something far more unnatural. Dark veins appeared beneath the pale flesh, spreading like ink through water, and where they reached, the skin took on a translucent quality that revealed the corruption spreading within. "Doctor," Samuel whispered during a brief moment when his own consciousness surfaced, "I can feel it eating me from the inside. It's so hungry, and it's using pieces of me to make itself stronger." The boy's breath, though he no longer truly breathed, carried the smell of pond water and something else, something organic and rotting that made everyone in the room gag. Martha had taken to holding a handkerchief soaked in lavender water over her nose, but even that couldn't mask the growing stench of spiritual decay. Isaac paced the room like a caged animal, clutching his grandfather's journals as if they might contain some overlooked salvation. "There has to be something," he muttered, flipping through pages with desperate urgency. "Some way to break the covenant, some way to send it back." Dr. Whitmore had abandoned any pretense of medical examination. His instruments were useless against this particular affliction. Instead, he found himself taking detailed notes of the supernatural phenomena, documenting the impossible with the same methodical precision he had once used to catalogue symptoms of pneumonia or consumption. If he survived this experience, perhaps his observations might help some future soul facing similar darkness. The voices of the dead grew more frequent as midnight approached, pouring from Samuel's lips in an endless stream of desperate pleas and warnings. They spoke of the entity's true nature, something far older than human settlement in Missouri, a predator that had haunted the deep places of the earth since long before men learned to make fire or till soil. It followed the underground rivers, spoke the voice of Tommy Morrison, the child who had died in the quarry collapse. Came up from the deep caves when they broke through the limestone. We didn't know what we were feeding when our blood soaked into the water. We thought we were just dead. We didn't know we were becoming food. Eugenia Hartwell's voice followed, trembling with posthumous fear. "It grows fat on suffering, stronger on despair. But it's not content to be a parasite anymore. It wants to hunt on dry land, wants to feel sunlight on stolen skin and taste fear directly from living throats." The most chilling voice belonged to someone who claimed to be Jeremiah Thornfield himself, speaking from beyond the grave to warn his descendants. "I thought I was so clever, making a deal for my children's prosperity. But it was never about the bargain. The creature was patient, willing to wait decades for the perfect vessel. It needed someone young, someone innocent, someone balanced precisely between life and death. It needed Samuel." As Jeremiah's voice faded, Samuel's eyes rolled back, and when they focused again, they held that terrible black depth that belonged to the entity. The thing had grown bold, no longer hiding its presence as it had during the first nights. It spoke directly now, its voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in the very bones of everyone present. "Can you feel it, mortals? The barrier growing thin? Tomorrow night, when the moon hides her face and the veil between worlds becomes gossamer, I will step through. This boy's flesh will become my flesh, his memories my memories, his life my resurrection." The entity's voice grew stronger, more solid, as if it were already beginning to inhabit Samuel's body more completely. "I have tasted what this world offers through the deaths of your men, Isaac Thornfield. The salt of tears, the copper of blood, the sweet nectar of absolute terror. But I want more. I want to walk among the living, to be the wolf among sheep, the spider in the web of human connection." Samuel's small hands gripped the blankets with supernatural strength, tearing the fabric as if it were paper. "When I wear this boy's face, who will suspect? Who will question the innocent child asking to come inside from the cold? And when I am invited in, when trust is given?" The entity laughed, a sound like drowning. "Oh, the feast that awaits. Dr. Whitmore felt bile rise in his throat as he realized the full scope of what they were facing. This wasn't just about Samuel anymore, it was about every family, every community that the creature would eventually encounter wearing the boy's face. It would be the perfect predator, hidden behind the mask of childhood innocence. Martha had been growing paler throughout the night, and now she swayed on her feet, catching herself against the wall. "I can hear them," she whispered. "The voices. They're not just coming from Samuel anymore, they're coming from everywhere. The walls, the floor, even from inside my own head." Dr. Whitmore looked around the room and realized she was right. The boundary between the spirit world and the physical realm was breaking down. Shadows moved independently of their sources. The temperature fluctuated wildly, going from freezing to stifling hot and back again. Most disturbing of all, he could see faint figures beginning to materialize in the corners of the room, the drowned dead, watching and waiting for the entity's triumph. Isaac found a passage in his grandfather's journal and read it aloud with a voice thick with desperate hope, spoke to the old Cherokee medicine man about the thing in the water. "He knows of it, calls it the Hungry One, says his people have stories going back centuries. Says there might be a way to bind it, but the cost." Isaac's voice trailed off, his face growing ashen. "What cost?" Dr. Whitmore demanded. Isaac's hands shook as he held the journal. "Says the binding can only be completed by someone who has looked into the creature's true nature and survived. Someone who can walk the line between life and death without being claimed by either. Says the person who performs the binding." He swallowed hard. "Says they become the lock that holds the door closed. Forever." The entity in Samuel's body let out a shriek of rage that shattered every window in the house. "You know nothing of binding me, foolish mortals. I am older than your civilizations, stronger than your hopes, hungrier than your worst nightmares. Nothing can contain what I have become." But even as it raged, Dr. Whitmore noticed something: fear. For the first time since this ordeal began, the creature seemed genuinely afraid. Which meant Isaac's grandfather had found something real, something that could actually threaten the entity's plans. Samuel's body began to convulse, his back arching until it seemed his spine must surely snap. Black fluid poured from his mouth, nose, and ears, not blood, but something older and more corrupt. The decay that had been spreading beneath his skin accelerated, and Dr. Whitmore could see that whatever was happening to the boy, it was reaching a critical point. "It's transforming," he realized aloud. "The entity isn't just possessing Samuel, it's remaking him from the inside out." Martha let out a broken sob and reached for her son, but Isaac caught her arm. "Don't touch him," he warned. "If that thing is right, if it completes the transformation tomorrow night, then Samuel will be gone forever. And something wearing his face will walk out of this house." The entity's laughter filled the room, echoing from every surface until it seemed to come from the very air itself. "Tomorrow night, Isaac Thornfield. When the dark moon rises, your son dies and I am born. And there is nothing, nothing, you can do to stop it." But as the creature's taunting continued, Dr. Whitmore found himself studying Samuel's face during the brief moments when the boy's own consciousness surfaced. There was still fight in those blue eyes, still a spark of defiance that the entity hadn't been able to extinguish. If there was hope to be found, it lay in that spark, and in whatever binding ritual Isaac's grandfather had learned from the Cherokee medicine man. The question was whether they could discover the details of the ritual and find someone willing to pay its terrible price before the dark moon reached its peak tomorrow night. Dr. Whitmore looked at Isaac, then at Martha, and finally at Samuel, and realized that one way or another, this family's long covenant with darkness was about to end. The only question was whether it would end in salvation or in the birth of something far worse than death. The final day dawned with a blood-red sky that seemed to press down upon the Thornfield farm like a bruised and swollen lid. Dr. Whitmore had spent the hours before sunrise poring over Jeremiah's journals with Isaac, searching for any detail about the Cherokee binding ritual that might offer salvation. What they found filled him with a dread that went deeper than fear. It reached into the very marrow of his soul and settled there like a cancer. The ritual required 3 elements: a vessel balanced between life and death, a willing sacrifice who could serve as the eternal guardian, and most horrifying of all, the complete destruction of the vessel to prevent the entity from ever finding another way through. In simpler terms, someone would have to kill Samuel to save him, and then bind their own soul to the pawn to ensure the creature could never escape again. "I'll do it," Isaac said without hesitation when they finished reading. "It's my family's debt, my ancestors' sin. I should be the one to pay the price." Dr. Whitmore looked at the farmer, this simple, honest man who had lived his entire life in the shadow of a bargain made before his birth, and felt a profound sadness settle over him. "Isaac, if you become the guardian, you'll be trapped there forever. No rest, no peace, just eternal watchfulness over something that will spend every moment trying to find a way free." "Better than letting it loose on the world wearing my boy's face," Isaac replied firmly. "Better than knowing that every person it kills, every family it destroys, happened because I was too much of a coward to do what needed doing." They returned to the parlor to find Samuel in the grip of another transformation. The decay had accelerated overnight, spreading through his body like a plague. His skin had taken on a mottled, greenish hue, and when he breathed, though breathing served no purpose for him now, the sound was wet and labored. Most disturbing of all, his features had begun to change. His face was elongating, becoming gaunt and predatory, while his fingers had grown longer, ending in what looked disturbingly like claws. Martha sat beside the bed, holding one of Samuel's transformed hands despite its unnatural appearance. She had aged years in the past few days, her hair gone white with stress and her eyes hollow with the kind of grief that comes from watching your child die by degrees. "He's still in there," she said without looking up. "Sometimes, when that thing isn't talking, I can see Samuel looking out. He's so scared, but he's fighting. My brave boy is fighting." The entity's presence was stronger than ever, no longer content to share space with Samuel's consciousness. When it spoke, Samuel's mouth didn't move. Instead, the voice seemed to emerge from the very air around them, as if the creature had grown large enough to inhabit the entire room. Tonight, the voice purred with anticipation. "When the moon goes dark and the barriers fall, I will step through into flesh and bone and blood. I will taste air with lungs, see light with eyes, feel pleasure and pain and all the exquisite sensations of living meat. And then..." The voice paused, savoring the moment. "Then I will hunt." Dr. Whitmore had made his decision during the long night hours, though he hadn't yet found the courage to voice it. He was older than Isaac, with no wife or children to mourn him. More importantly, his scientific background might help him understand the entity's nature in ways that could make him a more effective guardian. But most of all, he had looked into the creature's true face and survived, which, according to the Cherokee medicine man's words, was a prerequisite for the binding. "There's something else in the journal," Dr. Whitmore said quietly, drawing both parents' attention. "Something Jeremiah discovered about the nature of the binding. The guardian doesn't just watch, they become part of the barrier itself. Their will, their determination, their love for what they're protecting becomes the lock that holds the door closed." Isaac frowned. "What are you saying, Doc?" "I'm saying that whoever performs the binding needs to have the strongest possible reason to keep that thing contained. And looking at you, at Martha, at the love you have for your son." Dr. Whitmore's voice trailed off as he saw understanding dawn in Isaac's eyes. "You want to do it yourself," Isaac said. "I've studied this creature, documented its nature, looked into its true face without being destroyed. But more than that, I've come to care about Samuel, about your family, about all the innocent people who will die if this thing escapes. That caring, that connection, it might make the binding stronger." Martha looked up from Samuel's bedside, her eyes filled with tears. "Doctor, We can't ask you to sacrifice yourself for our family's sins. You're not asking, Dr. Whitmore replied gently. I'm offering. The entity's voice erupted in fury, shaking the very foundations of the house. You think your pathetic human emotions can bind me? I am hunger itself. I am the darkness between stars. I am the void that waits at the end of all things. But despite its rage, Dr. Whitmore heard something else in the creature's voice, fear. It was afraid of love, afraid of sacrifice, afraid of the connections between human souls that it could never understand or possess. Samuel's eyes cleared suddenly, and for a moment, the boy's own voice broke through the spiritual storm surrounding him. Dr. Whitmore? Are you really going to help me? Dr. Whitmore knelt beside the bed and took Samuel's transformed hand in his own, ignoring the way the claws pricked his skin. Yes, son. I'm going to help you. But Samuel, I need you to understand something. The only way to stop this thing is to let your body go. Your soul will be free, but your body has to die. Do you understand? Samuel nodded, his young face grave with understanding far beyond his years. I know. I can feel it using me up, eating me from the inside. I don't want to be what it's trying to make me into. He squeezed Dr. Whitmore's hand with surprising strength. Will it hurt? No, Dr. Whitmore lied gently. It will be like going to sleep. As the sun set on what would be Samuel's last day, the family gathered in the parlor for what they all knew would be their final hours together. Martha sang lullabies that Samuel had loved as a smaller child, her voice cracking with emotion but never faltering. Isaac told stories about his grandfather, about the farm, about the life Samuel might have lived in a world without ancient curses. And Dr. Whitmore prepared the ritual, following instructions written in a shaking hand by a man who had realized too late the true cost of his bargain with darkness. The Cherokee medicine man had been specific about the requirements. The ceremony must begin at moonrise and conclude before the dark moon reached its zenith. The vessel must be willing, the guardian must be determined, and the binding must be sealed with the willing sacrifice of innocent blood. As the last light faded from the western sky, Samuel looked at his parents with eyes that were entirely his own. Mama, Papa, I love you. And Doctor, thank you for being brave when I couldn't be. The entity's final scream of rage shattered every piece of glass in the house and seemed to go on forever, but Dr. Whitmore barely heard it. He was focused on Samuel's face, on the peaceful smile that replaced the fear and pain of the past few days, on the moment when an 8-year-old boy chose to save the world by letting go of his life. The ritual would begin at moonrise, and Dr. Whitmore would bind himself to the dark waters forever. But for now, in these last quiet moments, the Thornfield family was together, and Samuel was free of the hunger that had tried to devour him from within. It was, Dr. Whitmore thought, a good way to end. The moon rose invisible behind thick clouds, its absence creating a darkness so complete that even the brightest candles seemed to struggle against it. Dr. Whitmore had arranged everything according to Jeremiah's careful notes, drawing symbols on the floor with Samuel's blood, given freely, the boy had insisted, though each drop cost him visible pain. The Cherokee binding circle surrounded the bed where Samuel lay, his transformation nearly complete but his spirit still blazing with determination. Are you ready, son? Dr. Whitmore asked, his medical bag open beside him. Inside, instead of healing instruments, lay the tools of ending, a syringe filled with enough morphine to stop a heart that was already balanced on the edge of death. Samuel nodded, his changed features somehow still recognizably his own. I'm ready, Doctor. I'm not scared anymore. The entity sensed what was coming and threw its full power against the binding circle, but the Cherokee symbols held firm, containing its rage within the parlor walls. Martha and Isaac stood just outside the circle, their hands clasped together, their faces wet with tears but resolute with purpose. I love you, Samuel, Martha whispered. I love you more than words can say. "I know, Mama," Samuel replied, his voice growing faint as the morphine took effect. "Tell me about the farm in spring. Tell me about the flowers." As Martha spoke of daffodils and apple blossoms, of baby calves and fields turning green, Dr. Whitmore completed the binding. He felt the Cherokee words burning on his tongue as he spoke them, felt the ancient power accepting his offering. When Samuel's breathing finally stopped, truly stopped, with no supernatural force to animate his lungs, the boy's face relaxed into perfect peace. The entity's scream of fury shook the entire farmhouse, but it was already too late. The binding was complete, the gateway sealed, the hungry thing trapped once more in the depths beneath the ice. Dr. Whitmore felt the pull of the water calling to him, felt his own life force being drawn into the eternal watch he had accepted. "Go," he told Isaac and Martha as his vision began to blur. "Take Samuel's body and bury it in consecrated ground, far from the pond. Let him rest in peace." "Doctor," Isaac said, tears streaming down his weathered face, "we'll never forget what you've done." Dr. Whitmore smiled as the world faded around him. "Remember Samuel as he was. Remember that love is stronger than hunger, that sacrifice has power beyond what science can measure. And Isaac, burn those journals. Let the old bargains die with the old generation." The last thing Dr. Whitmore saw was Samuel's peaceful face, finally free from the corruption that had tried to claim him. Then the binding took hold completely, pulling his consciousness down into the dark water where he would stand guard for eternity. Years passed. The Thornfield farm prospered, but not through supernatural means, through honest work and clean living. Isaac filled in the pond, turning it into a meadow where wildflowers bloomed each spring. Martha lived to see grandchildren, all of them strong and healthy and untouched by the darkness that had haunted their family for generations. Sometimes, on nights when the moon was dark, people in town reported seeing a figure walking along the creek that led to the old Thornfield place. Some said it was the ghost of the doctor who had died trying to save a boy from a mysterious illness. Others claimed it was just shadows and wishful thinking. But Isaac knew better. On those nights, he would take his family inside and lock the doors, not from fear but from respect. Dr. Elias Whitmore was still keeping his promise, still standing guard over something that must never be allowed to wake again. The boy who had refused to die finally found his rest, and the hunger that had tried to wear his face remained trapped beneath water and earth and the unbreakable will of a man who had learned that some things were worth more than life itself. In the end, it had not been medicine that saved Samuel Thornfield. It had been love, sacrifice, and the terrible mercy of those willing to pay the ultimate price for another's freedom. The pond was gone, but it was never truly forgotten. Some knowledge, as Dr. Whitmore had learned, was too dangerous to lose completely. Some watches must be kept forever. And in the depths of sleep that was not sleep, in the darkness beneath the meadow where children now played, an old doctor continued his eternal rounds, making sure that what belonged to the dead stayed dead, and that the hungry darkness would never again taste the light of day. If you stayed with this story until the end and believe some knowledge should remain buried, comment, "The pond still remembers."